thank you so much for the music. I know people are still filing in. It's about 10 after 7, so for Missoula, this is about appropriate start time for a 7 o'clock event. My name is Bob Clark. I'm Senior Organizing Representative with the Sierra Club here in Missoula. I wanted to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity to ask people to please turn off their cell phones or put them on vibrate if you would. I also want to thank our sponsors for this event that are listed up here on the screen. And a huge help to have those organizations sponsor this. I also want to thank some of the volunteers that have helped myself and Dave Ditloff back here. Dave, you want to raise your hand from National Wildlife Federation. We've had really great help from students from the University of Montana on Climate Action Now, as well as other volunteers. Emily McCullough over here, Reed Polito over here, Kara Kolovich over here, Bert Bentley in the back over there. Thank you all for helping with the event. Also wanted to recognize, I know we've got staff here from Senator Tester's office, and possibly from Senator Baucus. Deb, if you want to raise your hand, please, from Senator Tester's office. And is Todd here? There we go, right there from Senator Baucus' office. Thank you for coming, really appreciate it. I'd like to just give a really brief background before we get started on sort of why we're here today. I could sort of turn the clock back about 6 years to 2007, Supreme Court ruling that confirmed the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to regulate greenhouse gas. That was a big deal. In 2009, the EPA completed an endangerment finding which said that greenhouse gases posed a threat to human health and welfare. And that sort of put the EPA on the trajectory of where we are today, where they have put out a rule that would limit the amount of carbon pollution from new power plants that are yet to be built. We're in a 60-day comment period this fall for this proposal. They're not going to be holding a public hearing in Montana. Very likely, there's one public hearing that's been that they've said that they were going to hold on this rule. It's very unlikely it'll happen in Montana, so we decided to do a citizens hearing ourselves. The final rule is expected in September of 2014. So this is a draft that's out right now. The comments that the EPA receives, they'll go back and look at those, and then they'll put out a final next summer. And hopefully that'll be done by September of 2014. So this is really a great opportunity to show support for the EPA's standards for new power plants by providing comments here at this event. You can do that in writing over there at the table, where we've got comment cards. You can also do that verbally up here. And Emily, who's standing over there by the door, has a sign-up sheet if people would like to give verbal comments. We're trying to hold those to 3 minutes. There's fact sheets as well back there by the comment table. There's a box where people can put their comments in when they're done filling those out. Want to let people know that there is food and drink in the back as well. As long as that lasts, you're welcome to indulge. There's a couple of co-sponsor information tables out on the foyer. Feel free to check out the information that's out there. We've got some free t-shirts up here in front, so if folks want to grab a t-shirt, we're trying to get those out into the community, so please feel free to do that. If folks need to use the restroom and not familiar with this venue, you walk out the doors of the theater, turn left, and then right on your left is the restrooms. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started on the verbal testimony, and we'd like to kick that off with Dr. Steve Running. Dr. Running is with the School of Forestry, and he shared in the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize for his work on climate science. So at this time, we'd like to call up Dr. Running.
Good evening. First, since it's so rare, I can't help but start with some good news that came today. The EPA just released the 2012 national carbon emissions, and they had gone down 4.7% in the U.S. in 2012. And boy, have I waited a long time for us to bend that curve a little bit. I can't overstate how important that is. It's obviously important in terms of just reducing carbon emissions. But from the stance of international negotiations, America was nowhere for years. We couldn't talk to any other country, China particularly, because they just said, well, look at you. Now, if we can do this for a couple of more years in a row and continue to ratchet down our own carbon emissions, it finally will give us a legitimacy in the international negotiations, which is really going to be important. And so this is a first step down in emissions. And of course, we had a brief lull on emissions back in '08 because of the economic collapse. And that's always another option that we have for reducing emissions, but it's not one that we hope we have to end up relying on. And so this year, we had a growing economy and a substantial reduction in emissions. I think that the other thing I want to make my brief point here tonight, I suspect all of us that would come out to an event like this have already done lots of the personal things about cutting carbon, everything from changing light bulbs in our houses to riding our bikes and driving smaller cars and all that kind of stuff. From a collective societal point of view, the single biggest thing we have to do is quit burning coal. In the global carbon budget that is calculated every year by a team of international scientists, 40% of carbon emissions worldwide are from burning coal. And so by far, far and away, this isn't even a hard prioritization. The first thing as a society we have to do is quit burning coal and quit selling coal to other countries to burn. I've made the point before that it's ludicrous to think that, well, if we don't burn the coal here but send it to Asia, then somehow that's okay. The CO2 comes back in the atmosphere faster than the empty barge gets home. And so it's all one atmosphere, and what we have to be driving for, and I think what this meeting tonight is about, is that we really have to get on a trajectory to quit burning coal worldwide. In the US, we've dropped our fraction of coal-fired electric power production from 50% to 37% in the last just half dozen years. And that's part of how we did this emission reduction in 2012. And so we're on our way on a national basis, but we really can't let up on this issue until on a global basis we're not burning coal for electric power. And the one thing about electric power production is, as opposed to a lot of other things that we may consider doing, there's lots of other options. And so burning coal for electric power, the only reason it's continued this long is because it's cheap. And the only reason it's cheap is because of the economics of all the damage that's done by coal burning have all been externalized to society. So we are all paying the price ourselves for the coal burning that's going on now. And so I think for this activity to really bear down on giving the EPA a strong and loud and solid statement of the interest of society in quitting burning coal, this is the single best thing we can be doing on a societal basis. So I hope we can get on it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Running. The next speaker is State Senator Dick Barrett from Senate District 47. Did I get that correct?
That's right.
Oh.
Thank you. My interest in this issue, of course, is the interest of any citizen. But it's also, my interest is in the way we address the issues that are before us as political leaders in the state. And I want to talk to you tonight about how I perceive what political leaders are saying. I want to talk to you a little bit about what I perceive political leaders are saying, and what I think I need you to be telling me. And I have colleagues here, Doug Coffin, who represents this House district, who I think will back up the same position. I really welcome this forum tonight and the idea that we're going to be talking about these new rules in the context of climate change, because what it seems to me that is singularly lacking in the political leadership of this state at this point is willingness to grapple with the reality of climate change. So that when we come to addressing questions like, when we come to addressing the question of these new regulations, these new limits on emissions from carbon, from new generating sources, we don't even allow the words climate change to pass our lips. Let me give you an example. Recently, Senator Brandon, who is the chairman of the Environmental Quality Council, that's the Legislative Environmental Quality Council, had an article in the state newspapers all around the state. It was here in the Missoulian, it was in the IR, it was in the Gazette in Billings. He had an article in the papers, an opinion piece saying that the director of the Department of Environmental Quality, Tracy Stone Manning, and that the governor should oppose these new regulations because of their impact on coal, okay? Because of their impact on Montana coal. That's an extraordinarily parochial view of what's at stake here, because what's at stake is obviously much, much greater. But nevertheless, that really is the way that political leaders in the state of Montana talk about this issue. Maybe they're scared of Steve Running when he says that we've got to get rid of coal. I mean, they're obviously scared. But that's all they look at. They don't look at the other side. They don't look at what's at stake here. And so what I think is very important for everybody, every citizen to be doing, is to be creating a space, to be and some pressure on political leaders to say, you need to be looking at these issues in terms of climate change. Okay? You need to say that arresting climate change is all important for the citizens of Montana. We're not just all about coal. We're about the future of the planet. We're sharing in the future of the planet, and that's what we're about. Now, all of that said, let me just say a few things that I want to say specifically about these regulations. And I think that these standards for new sources are important, but they're significantly limited in their impact. And I think we need more. And as we move forward, I think we need to talk about doing more. For one thing, these particular standards do not appear stringent enough to slow the growth of emissions, quite aside from the processes that Steve Running has already talked about. Because basically, the trajectory for future power generation and how that future power generation is fueled is already driven by the low price of natural gas. And so these regulations are unlikely to trigger any difference in that trajectory. They're not likely to actually reduce the growth of emissions. And you do have to take account of the fact that new standards for new facilities are addressing, in part, how fast emissions are going to grow. The other side of it, however, is that they also tell us what's gonna happen when we replace existing facilities with, the existing facilities, which are high emission facilities, with new facilities, which under these regulations have to be lower emission facilities. So, nothing in these are likely to change either of those factors. And the reason is that these standards are not sufficiently stringent to make natural gas replacement of coal generation that's going to be occurring anyway, occur any faster. So the bottom line of all of that is that we're not going to be able to address the issue of reducing coal use, reducing fossil fuel use in general, reducing overall emissions on a sustained basis until we have standards in place for existing sources. And I think that's what we have to be looking forward to in the future. Those standards for existing sources are going to have to be sufficiently rigorous that they trigger more replacement of existing sources with new sources that meet these new and rigorous standards. So that's what I think we need in order to put some real teeth into these new source standards. And I look forward to it. I just want to say one other thing about those standards for new sources, for existing sources that are forthcoming, and that's this. Glenn Opal, who works for the Montana Chamber of Commerce and who wrote a column recently for the Chamber of Commerce paper on these new standards, objected to them. And he objected to them on a somewhat ingenious basis. And that basis was that if you set these standards this high, then you'll discourage companies from engaging in innovation. And the reason you'll discourage them from engaging in innovation is you'll set them so high that there'll be a bar that they can't get over, and so they'll say, oh, we can't get there. Okay. Now, I've scratched my head over this argument quite a bit, and I've tried to pick it apart, and I'm not sure that it's right, but I think there's an element in there that you should pay attention to. And I think the bottom line is that as we go forward with standards for existing sources, it would be much better, in my mind, to make those standards in the form of a carbon tax. And the reason for that is that if you have a carbon tax, then any innovation that improves on emissions gives the innovator something. Okay, you have a less than perfect innovation, you're going to get a little bit less than a perfect return, but you're going to get some because you don't have to pay so much tax anymore. Okay. On the other hand, if you have this standard sitting out there that you can't wait, nobody can meet, you say, God, I got a great idea here, okay, on how I'm going to limit emissions, but it's not quite enough to let me actually build the plant and meet the standard. And so maybe Glenn's got a bright idea. I don't agree with him about much of anything, but maybe he's got an idea here. And I do think that we should continue to think about comprehensive approaches for both existing and new sources that involve things like carbon taxes or cap and trade or whatever you want to do.
Thank you very much, Senator Barrett. Next speaker up is Jason Weiner, who is a Missoula City Council member.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. As Bob said, I'm Jason Weiner. I'm a member of the City Council. And as someone who represents Missoulians and sees them every day and hears what they care about, I can tell you that Missoulians care about the future and they care about the climate. And they ask me what I'm doing to prevent climate change and prepare us for the impacts of it. And we do what we can. We have a municipal climate action plan, and it works to reduce the emissions from the city itself. We provide transportation options in terms of complete streets, a transit system that provides a lot of options, and I'll just say you probably got a ballot today that would allow you to vote to strengthen that system. And if you didn't get a ballot today, please get one before November 5th. And we're working to secure our water supply so that we have one of life's necessities in a carbon, in an insecure future. What the city cannot do is regulate carbon, which of course doesn't stop Missoulians from asking me what I'm doing to regulate carbon. So showing up tonight is basically the one thing that I can do. I can support the career appointed and elected officials who are taking steps that they are taking sometimes against entrenched and well-financed opposition to regulate carbon and begin to put us on a sustainable path. I can show up and support the proposed rule on existing coal power plants, on proposed new power plants, and the forthcoming rule on new power plants, on existing power plants that will, that also need to be addressed. These huge sources of atmospheric carbon right now. And finally, since I got a captive audience, at least until Bob pulls out the cane, I can also support passing a climate bill, one that puts us on a path to a secure, sustainable energy future. And this is a future where energy is not a constraint on our growth and development, but it's a catalyst for our growth and development. And when you find a new source of energy, it has that transformative potential. We could live in a very new, a very positive world if we would just get on to the next thing already. And by not putting the right price on the sources of fuel that we're using right now, we're forestalling that move. So, thank you again for coming here tonight. People are going to be running for office for the next year. Ask them what they're going to do about this, because the people who are running for the House and the Senate, they have the ability to regulate carbon. They have the ability to put us on the path to a sustainable energy future, and they will not talk about it. I guarantee you in Montana, unless you put the question in their mouth. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Councilman Weiner. The next speaker is Doug Coffin, who represents House District 93.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for doing this. I find it, and I'm not being trite or anything when I say that, because I find it a little bit incredible that the Saudi Arabia of coal wouldn't be allowed public comment to the EPA about coal. And so that's a little bit amazing to me. But so it's very, very important that these organizations put this together. And it's very important that we continue to work on this. Why? Because climate change is the future of our state and nation, both in terms of economics and our environment. I had the pleasure of sponsoring one of the major bills in the last legislature about climate change, and that was a resolution that was very simple. It had about 25 statements of fact, not opinions, but facts that were taken from NOAA and other sources about changes in temperatures, changes in pH and water and land, and changes in surface and air temperatures, so forth and so on. And the number of named storms in the last 10 years, and how the energy in our atmosphere is rapidly escalating. And the models now show climate change to be far worse than the people who provided the initial models in the 1980s. This is more dramatic. This is critical to our future. And we have to win. And the two biggest offenders in climate change in terms of greenhouse gases are coal and the internal combustion engine. We can win on coal. And we have one big thing on our side, and that's economics. Coal is the most expensive way to generate electrical energy. Northwest Energy knows it, and they're planning for an alternative energy future. The co-ops know it, and they're planning. Now all we have to do is get the climate change deniers who killed our bill in the legislature to admit it, to come around to reality. And it was a reality check in essence. We knew they were going to kill it. But it was a reality check for them. To say, all the resolution said is that climate change is real, it's a scientific fact. That we have to do more research on it. So we know how, in particular, it affects Montana. Montana's in the bullseye. Our surface temperatures are going up as fast as any place else in the nation. And that affects agriculture. And you know what? The people in agriculture know it. And they're scared. And they should be. Because if the pH of soil changes, as most of us know, it fundamentally changes the flora and fauna of our state. We have economics on our side because all we have to do is provide the inertia to push coal over the edge. And that's what the people in places like Colstrip are scared of. They're scared for their future. And in a way, I don't blame them. And one of the things we have to do, if we want to do the right thing, is convince them that they have a future without coal too. And that as citizens of Montana, we're going to take care of them. And we're going to help them in this transition. And we're going to make this transition. But we have to admit that it's real. We have to do the research. And we have to plan, more than anything. The Clark Fork Coalition is taking the leadership. So are several of these organizations up here to plan the effects on our watersheds all across the state. Blackfoot, Flathead, so forth and so on. And how our water supplies are going to be affected, how those drainages are going to be affected. Those are just a couple of examples. But the greatest thing about working in the legislature on climate change was the energy that came from people like you. We had a great hearing. We had so many people, they all didn't have time to testify, and we still did that with extra time. So I'd like to thank the people up here who supported our resolution. And I hope that you folks can stay engaged. I wish we had this kind of support for higher ed. It's not even close. You guys outnumber them, the energy is far greater, you know? So keep it up, keep up the good work. We're gonna have a lot of new resolutions. Senator Barrett and several other legislators, we had a conference call last night, planning for the next session. We hope we can include you in those plans. We're gonna have a lot of new legislation proposed, and we're gonna take this head on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Coffin. Before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to mention a couple of things. There's a couple of people that have come in since this started, so I wanted to mention that there is a table in the back with fact sheets and comment cards that we're asking people to fill out and put into the box. Dave's right back there with us. And then the other thing, I'd like to ask Reed to stand up with his red shirt. There we go. As speakers come up, we're going to try to keep the comments to 3 minutes. So if you keep an eye on Reed, he'll give you a 1 minute and a 0 minute sort of, nudge. With that, I wanted to bring up our next speaker. Jan Holm is with an organization called Montana Elders for a Livable Tomorrow. Jan?
It's so good to see all of you here today. And thank you to the organizers of this event that brings us together to discuss the improvements in the EPA standards for new coal-burning power plants. As a group, we work together to contribute to the tally of people who support a stronger EPA on carbon pollution. And that makes a difference. It's really important that you're here and that they hear your voice. If the burning of coal were only a question of whether we create more jobs or use the easily accessed coal, these standards might not be so critical. But it is a question of the future of humans on our planet. Coal is without a doubt the most CO2 polluting industrial energy source available to us, and our industrial production of CO2 is warming the planet. We don't really know what the final consequences of this will be. I brought a graph that Don Hyman was using last night on KECI. This graph shows what has happened to the Earth's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the last 400,000 years. And I have another graph that just shows that the carbon dioxide and methane gases and temperature really track each other very well. I'll get it out here. If you look at it, those are three different lines. One is methane, one is carbon dioxide, and one is temperature, and they work together. More carbon dioxide and more temperature. Okay, so the vertical line on here is the parts per million from 160 to 400, and the horizontal line goes from 400,000 years ago to the present, and this actually goes back to 650,000 years ago. And this information came from NASA and NOAA and the dissolved carbon dioxide in the Vostok ice cores. So what we see is every 100,000 years, the carbon dioxide and the temperature goes through a cycle. It drops and then it goes up. It becomes cooler, it becomes warmer. It becomes cooler, it becomes warmer, it becomes cooler, and then we come to 1950, 2009, and 2013. We're now at over 400 parts per million. This is very serious. We have a problem. The Earth maintained an equilibrium for 650,000 years. Man has disturbed the balance by burning fossil fuels, coal being the worst. And here we are at 400 parts per million. We are living with climate change today. We know the fire season is longer, the nights are warmer, the children's asthma rate has doubled in the last 40 years, storms are more intense. This is a big problem. And time is our enemy, and we need to start now. So here we are to support the EPA for acting responsibly to reduce the number of coal-fired power plants being built. Given the gravity of the situation we are in, we need more. Hopefully the EPA will be looking at dirty power plants such as Colstrip in the near future. And thank you all for being here and making a difference.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Appreciate that. I'd like to call up the next speaker now. Vicki Watson works here at the University of Montana as a professor. I'd like to have Vicki come up.
Hi, I'm a watershed ecologist. I've been working on sustainable use of water resources in Montana for the past 30 years. And I currently serve on the Clark Fork Basin Task Force, which along with several other basin task forces have been charged by the Montana legislature with updating the Montana State Water Plan. This is a non-regulatory plan that guides citizens and state agencies in making decisions about allocating our increasingly scarce water resources. In addition to analyzing past and projected water supply and use and availability data, we're gathering public input on issues that plan should address. And here's what we're hearing. Both water scientists and citizens are pointing out that we already have severe water shortages. We have whole basins closed to new water withdrawals. We have over 4,000 miles of chronically or periodically dewatered streams in Montana. This is one of the most common causes of stream impairment. That is, streams that don't support their beneficial uses and violate water quality standards. In coming years, population growth and land development and energy development will all make the situation worse. All of these contribute to higher flood flows and then lower summer flows, because more of the water floods off in the spring and less is left to percolate into groundwater and support base flows during summer flow. For the first time, the state water plan will also consider the impacts of climate change, which is expected to magnify those very extremes, that is, causing still higher flood flows and still lower summer flows. In addition, we're already seeing our cold water fisheries, our trout streams, suffer from rising stream temperatures, and once again, lower summer flows and higher air temperatures mean even higher stream temperatures, further degrading our trout streams. So in the new state water plan, the task force will likely be making many recommendations to use our increasingly short water resources and our increasingly short financial resources to adapt to these worsening stream conditions. Conflicts over water will rise, and the cost of addressing those conflicts will also rise. So in my view, it's essential to the well-being of present and future Montana citizens that we not just plan to adapt to these problems, but that we also address the causes of climate change. And carbon emissions from power plants are major contributors. So I support the EPA's proposal to reduce carbon emissions from these plants by developing carbon emission standards for both new and old plants. Thanks. I hope you'll all do the same.
Thank you, Vicki. Appreciate that. Next speaker I'd like to call up is Sterling Miller, who's a retired Alaska Fish and Game and National Wildlife Federation. I said retired, didn't I, Sterling? Okay, I want to make sure I said that.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks all of you for being here. I'm worked for a long time in Alaska. I'm primarily a bear researcher, and at high latitudes, climate change is affecting the environment at a much more rapid pace than it is at lower latitudes. But ultimately, we're all going to get to the same place. I was asked to talk about wildlife adaptation to climate change, which is something I've been working on for about the last 15 years with the National Wildlife Federation. And I think the primary point to be made is that many species will be affected in different ways by climate change, but that the species that will be affected early and most dramatically, adaptation will be futile unless we do something about what's causing the climate to change. Essentially, all we're doing is putting our finger in the dike, and ultimately the impacts from a changing climate will overflow that dike, and the species that we're trying to make adapt better on the short term won't be able to survive in the long term. Now, there are a number of different things that affect a species' resilience to climate change. I'm primarily a bear guy, so two of the best examples do come from the bear family. Species that have a narrow ecological niche, that have a very specialized to a very specific habitat, that specialized to a very specific food. Those are the species that are going to be affected first and most severely by climate change. And the foremost example for that in the bear world is the polar bear. By mid-century, the expectations are, or even before that, the expectations are that in late summer the polar ice cap will be completely gone. The polar ice cap, the floating ice over the North Pole, is what polar bears depend on. That's their exclusive habitat. They evolved from a terrestrial species, a brown bear, to adapt to this habitat and to specialize in that habitat. And without that habitat, they can't survive. The habitat will be, it's my expectation, that polar bears will be functionally extinct in Alaska within a very few years, which means there will probably still be some adults but there will be no recruitment and no young bears. Since they're a long-lived species, adults will linger on for many years, but they won't have recruitment, and that's what I call walking extinction or functional extinction. On the other hand, there are some species like grizzly bears and black bears, which are very adaptable. They're generalist species. They eat a wide range of things. They live in a wide range of habitats, and those species will be much more resilient to impacts of climate change than specialist species like polar bears, or another example would be whooping cranes or something like that that live in a very, very narrow habitat. Species that have low reproductive rates will, all other things being equal, will have a harder time adapting than species with very high reproductive rates. And that's because to the degree that species can adapt genetically in the normal process of evolution, if you have very high turnover, you have a higher chance of being able to adapt genetically. However, the rate at which climate change is progressing now far exceeds most events in geologic history, short of asteroids hitting the Earth. And so the ability of species to adapt genetically through Darwinian evolution is very reduced because of the rapid change in environments that species are exposed to because of the buildup of greenhouse gases and the corresponding changes in the climate. Some species, one of the things that will happen is that climates, envelopes that exist in more southern areas will be moving northwards. So we see this already as species that are evolved like further south, like armadillos and things like that, are now able to move far further north. Species like sage grouse, their center of their distribution has moved over 100 kilometers north in recent decades. Audubon Society's surveys have shown. So as these climate envelopes move around, that doesn't mean necessarily that the habitats will move correspondingly. That's because there's a lot more to a habitat than just a climate envelope. There's soils and other abiotic factors that go into making a habitat suitable for wildlife, and just because the weather or climate conditions are similar to what they are here, and those conditions now will occur 100 kilometers further north, doesn't mean that the same habitats will occur further north. In this case, terrestrial species are at a disadvantage compared to aquatic species, because their habitats will be shifted around in 2 dimensions on the landscape, whereas aquatic species that live in rivers and lakes will have to stay in the same place. Those are not going to be shifted 2-dimensional, they'll just be shifted in 1 dimension. And so they have somewhat more ability, or humans have, to affect how aquatic species will adapt to climate change than terrestrial species, although it's going to be very challenging for aquatic species too. We already are seeing, for example, increased late season fishing closures because of low volumes of water and higher temperatures causing fish stress, and fish wildlife parks having to close seasons progressively. One of the things I'll just say in closing is that one of the hero of wildlife biology and the founder of wildlife biology was Alva Leopold, who wrote in Sound County Almanac relative to species extinction that the first rule of intelligent tinkering is to save all the parts. Well, I think that we can no longer expect to save all the parts. And one of the challenges of the future is going to be the process of triage and deciding which species we can save and which species are futile to try and save. And so we can address our efforts at the ones that we have some potential of influencing and not waste resources on ones that can. Now, that is anathema to most ecologists and most biologists. It's completely contrary to the way that we were taught. We all accept the Leopold dictum of intelligent tinkering, but I think we need to examine whether that is in truly the best interest of trying to save wildlife under this unprecedented threat that they're facing now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sterling. The next speaker I'd like to call up is representative from American Lung Association, John Firehammer. Okay, there's John. John's a little taller. I'm going to raise this up in preparation.
Hello there. I'm John Firehammer. I'm with the American Lung Association Healthy Air Campaign. And this is a campaign that was started a few years back to protect and to strengthen the Clean Air Act. And so we've been working on a number of different standards under the Clean Air Act, not just having to do with carbon, but carbon is sort of the thing that's come up on our agenda right now. But we've worked on emissions of other hazardous pollutants from power plants, and most recently the rule having to do with mercury and other air toxins. And the gist of the campaign and what we try and focus on is what the Clean Air Act was created to do, which is to protect human life by doing everything that's scientifically and technologically possible to reduce hazardous pollutants. And so it was passed in 1970, and since that beginning we've seen just tremendous reductions in all sorts of pollutants from power plants, which unlike some folks say, rather than hindered the development of new technology, actually advanced technology faster, because we were in a situation where we needed to clean up and meet these emission goals and use the technology that we have on hand to do so. So carbon is an air pollutant, and that means under the Clean Air Act we need to do what is technologically and scientifically possible to reduce the emissions of carbon into our atmosphere. And we do have the ability to do that, and we also have the ability as a country to advance our technology and to start meeting some of those goals in the future. So, and it's all about protecting human health. We've been working with physicians and different health groups around the state throughout this campaign, getting them engaged, doing meetings with physician leaders, and doing some work in the media and sponsoring events and so on to talk about the importance of our Clean Air Act and what it does to reduce asthma attacks, help prevent cancer. The World Health Organization just last week came out with a statement that air pollution is a carcinogen, and so we need to keep all of those. We have to remember why we have the Clean Air Act and what it's supposed to do, and in this case with carbon emissions, carbon pollution, under the Clean Air Act, it's been determined that this is a mechanism that is appropriate for us to reduce this form of pollution. Carbon, without talking about the climate impacts of it, it contributes to ozone, which is also called smog. Ground level ozone is a major trigger for asthma attacks, and sends people to hospital if they have asthma. That's one of the things that can trigger a severe attack and cause them the need for medical care. And it also is a hazard for children because they have developing lungs, and as your lungs have not quite matured, they're at greater risk for harm due to air pollution as you get older. And so that's just without talking about the climate impacts. And we all know, and we've heard a lot about how our climate is warming and the impacts of that in Montana our shorter winters and longer summers, and the physicians that we work with in our campaign, they see the end result of this already from these fire seasons that we've had in Missoula and other parts of the state. They are seeing more kids with asthma coming in, having problems with respiratory distress, and that's just going to become a continuing problem as our summers get longer and these wildfire seasons are more prevalent. So there are all these human health impact reasons to be concerned about carbon emissions, and that's just one part of it. We've heard about sort of the planetary health, but it also has to do, it's closer to home for all of us. We're talking about our own self-interest here as well. There are a lot of other health impacts. Of course, the Lung Association likes to talk about lungs, so a lot of our focus is on asthma and things that can trigger problems for people with lung disease. So we are very supportive of this new source standard. There's this is unlike mercury, where there are limits on that, and dioxins and other toxic air pollution. There are limits, and there's been technology put in place to help reduce the amount that is being put into air. There's no limit on carbon at all. It's just free for all. There's you can emit as much carbon as you want right now. So it only makes sense looking into the future that if we're going to build new power plants, that we address the impact of carbon emissions. And beyond that, we need to take a look at the plants that are online now and look at reducing those emissions as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. I'd like to remind folks about the comment card. I don't think I've mentioned about the comment cards yet, have I? Yes, I think I have. In the back, if folks haven't gotten a chance to grab one of those and fill it out, drop it in the box, that'd be great. There looks like there is a little bit of food left too, and feel free to take that. I'd like to also remind folks that our trusty volunteer Reed down here, put up your hand, has these little cards that say 1 minute and 0 minutes, so please keep an eye on Reed as you do your comments. I'd like to at this time call up the next speaker, and I believe we might have dueling speakers, Hank Stein and Kara Kolovich from the University of Montana Climate Action Now.
So hi, I'm Kara Kolovich, and like Bob said, we are representing University of Montana's Climate Action Now group here on campus, or CAN. So CAN sees the EPA's proposed carbon dioxide limit for new power plants as the real first initiative our country has taken on addressing climate change. But it's not solely up to government or national organizations to shift us towards a sustainable future. It's us, the young generation, who needs to voice our concerns and desires for a livable tomorrow. We will be the ones bearing the accumulated effects of pollution from years past. Many University of Montana students have come here tonight in support of the EPA's stance on reducing pollutants that cause climate change. We understand that the compromise we face today of consuming cheap, dirty energy that fills our energy needs now but leads to an unstable future. In shifting from fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy sources, we're not only providing a healthier environment, but more resilient communities and social equity and new jobs for those of us graduating soon. Our generation simply wants a fair opportunity to achieve happy, prosperous life. By addressing climate change now and not later, we are working towards a future that is livable for many generations. Here's my fellow CAN member, Hank, who has some exciting news from the Power Shift event that many CAN members went to this last week.
So yeah, as Kara just told you, myself along with 4 other CAN members took over Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We were attending Power Shift, which is the National Youth Climate Conference on climate change. So, and as you can probably guess, the conference by the name was about shifting the power. It's about shifting the power from fossil fuels to green fuels like wind and solar. It's about shifting the power from the generation that has polluted our planet to the generation that is inheriting it. And this climate action public people's hearing is about shifting the power from corporate polluters to the people. This is what the youth believe in, people. And let me tell you, I'm really inspired by people. It is through the power of the people that we will be able to fight climate change. We, the people, are the voice of democracy. We, the people, are the advocates for a cleaner tomorrow. With clean American jobs, making clean American energy, it's just great. But yeah, there's a movement out there. And I mean, 10,000 youth from across the nation, high school and college age students, came to Pennsylvania, came to Pittsburgh, and came with the message that we want to change. And I mean, there's indigenous communities in Canada that are waging war against tar sands. The East Coast is taking a stand against fracking, and us in the West Coast are trying to derail coal exports. And we're not alone. So our individual voices sound great, and our voices together will overwhelm the fossil fuel industry. But the youth also realize that we need to fund solutions, not pollution. And so I'm happy the EPA is starting to realize this too. But we also want more. So to end, I read something online today I thought was really cool. It was about the youth movement. So it goes like this. Yes, we are idealistic, hopeful, creative, and young. But those are our greatest attributes. Thank you.
Thank you, Hank and Kara, very inspiring. I'd like to now call up the next speaker. Is Aaron O'Connor in the audience? Okay, you're next. If you'd like to come up and say a few words.
Sure,
Yeah. Thank you.
I had no idea I would have an opportunity to do this. That's what you get for not paying really close attention when someone says, sign here. But some things really did come to mind listening to everyone tonight. And I was particularly impressed by the organization Montana Elders for a Livable Tomorrow. And I think I want to reassure some of the young people here that not everyone from my generation is into burning coal and polluting the air and destroying the environment. So I want to add to your hopefulness and encourage you to keep doing the good work that you're doing to raise attention. And I want to share just something that I learned when I moved to Montana 27 years ago. And I started visiting the reservations and making acquaintance with Native people. I heard them talk about the long time ago when the councils made all their decisions based on the effect of those decisions on the 7th generation of the future. So I just want to remind you that the wisdom is there. So just keep on trucking and get her done. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Aaron. I'd like to call up our next speaker, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce the last name, Louisa Dupuis. Dupuis. I was pretty darn close there. I've never taken French. So.
I'm all dressed for this. I didn't know I was coming. But I got here and I thought I better say something. I want to talk to you just a few comments in honor of my great-grandmother, who was Métis. She was French, Indian, Assiniboine and Cree, and I am Louisa Dupuis. This morning, the reason I wanted to talk to you is because this morning I went early from on the Blackfoot where I had just went up and spent the night, and I went into the Bonner truck stop to get some coffee and one meat stick, right? As I was going in the door, I looked up and I saw this shattered flag, this U.S. huge flag, and it was all a lot of tatters. And I kind of laughed a little bit and I says, hey, you know, to a couple guys coming in out of their rig, and I says, hey, maybe that's kind of how our government is right now. So then I went in, I got my coffee and I got my meat stick, and I came back out and I looked up again, and I was kind of chuckling, you know, kind of not taking it too seriously, but seriously. And I looked up and what did I see? The big sign above me says, Exxon. And I hardly need to say more. Yeah, and I talked to a couple people about that, you know, just kind of wow, and I saw it. I want to remind you that we have 4 sacred elements: our wind, our fire, our earth, and our air, and they're sacred. And they are sitting there waiting for us to make all the power we need to run our little machines and in our society. And what we need is respect for the earth and a change in our basic attitude that we are one of many species, we are not superior, and that we are part of the whole. We live on a living, breathing organism, the earth. And thank you.
Okay, thank you, Louisa. We have one more person on the verbal comment list, and I'd like to call up, and I'm going to really have a hard time at this last name as well, but Caitlin Pasersha? Is that correct? Wow. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Pasersha, and I'm a student at the University of Montana, as well as an officer of UN Climate Action Now. I'm speaking tonight